Welcome to the podcast. We do recover with Jared Miller, your host.
And I'm Dr. Terry Sellers, your co-host.
This is a podcast about recovery from addiction.
We want to talk about what successful recovery can look like.
Brought to you by Diamond Detox, Rise Up Supplements, and the Hilton Garden Inn.
Welcome to episode 161, everybody. Today's episode title is going to go in the books as A Conversation with Keith Hansen. That's because we have Keith Hansen in the studio today, and he's going to share his story with us. Super excited for that. Keith, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me on. You've been at me for a while to do this.
Yeah. That sounded terrible. You've been at me for a while to do this.
No.
So Keith's a good buddy of mine. We go golf most Fridays, I would say.
Yeah.
I'm for sure a better golfer than him. Don't ask him about our scores today. That's just my story, and I'm going to stick with it. Especially when I three-putt everything. But anyways, that's a different podcast, different topic. It'll be good having him on, sharing his story. Before we get to his story, though, episode 161 is brought to us by Diamond Detox. Let Diamond Detox be the first step on your path to hope, help, and healing. Call their free and confidential number at 385-988-5332. That's 385-988-5332, or visit their website at diamonddetox.com. 161 is also brought to us by Rise Up Supplements. Rise Up Supplements is a nootropic supplement line aimed at optimizing brain function and supporting mental health. They have two powerful blends. Mindful Mood helps decrease anxiety and enhance mood. Mind Shift helps increase focus and optimize brain function. Place your order today at riseupsups.com. That's RISEUPS.com. At checkout, punch in all caps, podcast 20 to save yourself 20% off your entire purchase. We appreciate the sponsors. It wouldn't be possible without sponsorships.
For sure.
Denovan's expensive over there. We got all these cool lights, this little studio rental time, right?
Denovan's expensive here? What? What?
No, he actually gives us a pretty good bargain on this, and we're going to negotiate after this episode to continue here.
I know, because I'm trying to quit. I've been listening to so many of your episodes about quitting that I was just trying to jump on the bandwagon here. So
I see. You've gone through the 12 steps of...
Yeah, so I'm trying to detox myself from podcasts.
I get it. Okay.
And you're just like, come on, man, just one more.
Frankly,
How did you learn that trait?
When's the last time Denovan jumped on here and shared his 2 cents, right? Like, I'm just thrilled that you're chiming in today. You got a little pep in your step.
I'm turning the fan back on. It's getting hot in here already.
I appreciate that.
All right. Well, Keith, this is a podcast about recovery from addiction.
It is.
You're a guest on a podcast about recovery from addiction, which, I mean, kind of goes without saying. You've got a story.
I do. Yep. I've been a long time coming to get to finally find recovery. But it's interesting. I was telling you this before we got on air about I've been listening to your podcast for about 4 years. One of the times I was trying to get sober about 4 years ago, I was in some outpatient treatment here in St. George over at Premier Counseling, and the counselor Ryan Park was a guest of yours and told us clients to give it a listen, and I did, and even through not being in recovery yet, I've listened to most of the episodes and learned things along the way that I'm finally, hopefully, applying in my life. So,
dude, first of all, thank you so much for listening to him. Second of all, we've been at this for a while. How long ago was that? Like 4 years?
That was about exactly 4 years ago, because I was in treatment with him in 2021, this time of year. It was probably about exactly 4 years ago.
That's awesome. And then also shout out to Premier Counseling. They do a fantastic job here in Southern Utah, especially Ryan Park. He's a good dude, man. Just a really good human being. In fact, with the recent, so I got hired again, got a job doing a community outreach for Wasatch Crest. Little shout out and love to Wasatch Crest. Absolutely. Up there in Heber. And so he was the first place that I've actually officially stopped in at, right? And I, just because, I felt comfortable with Ryan. Like Ryan was, when I was interning at my last place, he was finishing up like his internship hours right before he went over and started Premier.
And that Ryan episode was almost exactly 4 years ago.
Yeah.
March 19th, 2021.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
Wild. But, like he's just one of those people that even when I was like fresh, super green intern, like just took me under his wing and, just always willing to help. Such a good, nice guy. Again.
Yeah, he absolutely is. Breath work and meditation, which I'm sure we'll get into later, is a staple of my recovery now. And that's solely because he introduced me to that concept 4 years ago, mindfulness and meditation and the importance of that. I was in a 12-step meeting recently, and the speaker was saying that he thinks meditation is one of the most underutilized principles in the 12 steps. And I agree. It makes a big difference in my life to quiet this active mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well said, man. Well, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a good way to kick this thing off. So here's the ground rules.
Okay.
Share as much or as little as you're comfortable with. The last thing I want is for you to walk away, wake up tomorrow, and have like a vulnerability hangover, right? So share as much or as little as you're comfortable with. However, keep in mind, it always helps to connect with the audience, right? Share a message of hope. So here we go. Where would you say that this thing really started for you? Because there's we both know recreational use and experimental, occasional, one time, right? That's not what we're talking about on this podcast.
Yeah. It's interesting thinking back in life. So as a child, opiate pain medication became my drug of choice in active addiction, and later on alcohol and both at times. But growing up, I had numerous surgeries as a child, and I don't remember that euphoric feeling from. I'm sure I was on pain meds after the surgeries I had, but I specifically remember the first time I felt that opiate high. It was in high school. Somebody gave me a pill, ironically, on the way to LDS seminary class, and I remember sitting in that class and just oh, what is that? But that was a one-time thing. At that point, I'd experimented with alcohol. I partied on the weekends the last couple of years of high school, and but pills didn't become a thing until later on. And partied for a little while. Functional. Finished high school. Just typical small town Utah kid.
What small town?
Fairview in Sanpete County.
Fairview. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but born and raised in a good family, stable home. My dad was the hardest working person I'd ever met. Small business owner, taught me how to work at a young age, but no significant childhood trauma or anything like that. And in fact, there's been times.
I mean, outside of the surgical traumas, right?
In fact,
how many surgeries did you have at what age?
As a infant, or 0 to 2, probably a few. So my left ear didn't develop completely in the womb, and so my ear is basically man-made from a surgeon over numerous surgeries, anywhere from I think 2 to probably 10 years old. And then when I was a senior in high school, I had a major one where my jaw used to sit up a little bit more crooked, and so they went in and broke my jaw and straightened it out and took a bone from my rib. So some pretty I never looked at that as trauma until, in fact, one of the times I got sober, and one of my sisters told me that. She's like, because I was kind of battling, I don't know why I struggle with this. I didn't have any major childhood trauma. And she's like, what are you talking about? Of course you did. Mm. And until then, I never even looked at it like that. So I did have some traumatic things as a child through just surgical procedures, I guess. And then,
which all with good intentions, but at the same time, sometimes medical care, medical treatment can become traumatic.
Yeah.
My little brother, he struggled with health problems his whole life, and he had a kidney transplant when he was in second grade. And yeah, just watching him go through that, it's tough, man. It's hard on the brain. But I get what you're saying, right? Yeah. The typical, what most people would think of as trauma is child abuse, sexual abuse, things like that didn't happen when you were growing up.
Those things weren't present. And growing up, I was never bullied or anything like that. I always had a good group of friends, but I was more self-conscious than people realized about my ear and what I thought the way that I looked like. And so I think once I found something that kind of helped with that's was good until it wasn't.
Are you cool if I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Because here's foundationally for me, this is really important for people to understand. Based on what you just said, being a little bit insecure about that. What was the narration or the belief that you were telling yourself about that?
I think I just kept myself more reserved in certain circles because I mean, people did, they would stare sometimes, and I finally got to the point where that didn't bother me. But I think I was just curious about what people thought of the way that I looked. Even now, people have been surprised; they don't even notice. But in my head, still, it's like that's the first thing someone's going to notice about me is my ear is different than others.
Got you. And that, I feel like, thank you for sharing that, because I think I've been doing this like we just talked about for years, and a very common theme is people share, like, I just felt like I was different than everybody else. Yeah. I felt like I was ostracized or an outcast, and then they come back and say exactly what you just said. It wasn't so. Like, I have evidence to prove otherwise, but in my mind, that was my reality, right?
Yeah, and in fact, jumping forward a little bit for a second, when I was doing my Step 5, when I was in treatment a couple of years ago, I had written a lot about my view of myself because of my appearance, and the guy that I was doing my Step 5 with just looked, he's like, I didn't even notice. And I'd interacted with him for weeks in treatment, and I was like, oh, I just figured that everybody, that's the first thing they would notice about me when they met me.
To be totally honest, when I first met you, I'm like, this guy is like a super kind, super nice, very smart guy, and that was a little intimidating because you are.
I hope
a
my
pretty
wife's
smart
listening
cat,
to this,
right?
because she hearing somebody call me kind is not always the way that I'm viewed in the home.
Oh yeah. Okay, sweet. I listen. I appreciate you sharing this so far. So, high school, somebody gives you a pain med. Do you remember what it was? I mean, it's not.
Yeah,
even
it was like a Loratab 5, something pretty simple. But then that later became my drug of choice, was Loratab Percocet.
And how quick did that transition happen from like a one-time use where you were like, "Oh, what is this?" to?
It didn't until I remember. Even that would have been a few months after that last major surgery, and I don't remember feeling that way after that. But then I remember getting a wisdom tooth out and get a prescription, and definitely took them until they were out after I needed them. And then I went on an LDS mission, so there wasn't any issues through there. Had a really good experience.
Where'd you go on your mission, man?
Riverside, California.
Oh,
down
cool.
Palm Springs area, Menifee, all through there. So.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
Did that. I came home. I didn't drink for probably a few months after my mission, and then started drinking socially a little bit. And same thing, I had shoulder surgery. I kept popping my shoulder out, doing various things, and definitely enjoyed the pain meds through there. And then it didn't become a problem until a few years later. I moved down to here to St. George, got into nursing school at the time, Dixie, now Utah Tech, and became a nurse, and then started doing some unethical things and got my drugs that way, and that was when I was off to the races, so to speak.
What drew you into the medical field?
As a child, I always said I wanted to be a doctor. I think 'cause I was around it so much with doctor's appointments and hospitalizations and stuff, and then at some point after my mission, I was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do. My dad was just a hard blue collar working guy, and he had always told us kids, like, go get an education so you don't have to beat up your body like I have. And so I wanted to do something, get educated, but I didn't really want to go through the whole process of medical school, and so nursing was a little bit of an easier, softer way in its own way, and there was a lot of opportunities. I thought that you can do a lot of different things in nursing, and so I went that route. And then it wasn't very long after I was a nurse that I started kind of beating the system, so to speak. And
yeah, we'll get to that.
Yep.
Before I say this, let me just say I have so much respect for people that go into the medical field. My sweet wife Mandy, she's just got done with her pre-med stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And oh my gosh, like the OChem and some of that stuff that you guys all have to take. Nope, I'm no way. It's crazy. Like, so hats off to you. Super. Yeah. I feel like anybody, whether it's a nurse, a PA, physician, like my hats off to you. That's a lot of education and a lot of hard work.
Yeah, the doctors, the knowledge base that doctors have to have just to function as a basic doctor is mind blowing to me.
And yet I just always assume that they just look up on Google.
There's a lot of that nowadays, I'm sure. But,
Right? They're like, oh, you itchy on your right arm as they're, they're probably charting. But in my mind, they're just Googling it.
yeah, I'm sure there's some of that goes on.
Sweet. I paid $300 for you to look up Google. Okay. So as you kind of hinted to, got in. So you are a registered nurse.
Yeah.
RN.
Yep. I am finally licensed again.
I got
Get
some
into
cool
that.
friends, man. I got some cool friends. Okay. At what point did that, you said you started kind of doing some unethical stuff? Talk to me about that. What did that look like for you?
It was, at the time I worked in a facility. And
How old are you too? Sorry.
I was 25, 26 at that time.
Okay.
And looking back on that, what's just mind blowing to me now is at that time, I had a budding career. I met my wife, and finally found my wife, and who I'd been looking for so long. I'd never been in long-term relationships, and instead of spiraling up and just running with that, like my twisted mind found something that would make me feel even better physically. Plus, I had all these good life things going on. So instead of spiraling up, I started living a double life basically. And there's so much shame that's involved in the behavior you get involved when you start diverting drugs and keeping it a secret and hiding. And
Sure.
I mean, my parents had no idea until I called them and told them, hey, I just had to surrender my nursing license and I'm going to rehab.
I bet that was an eye opener for them.
Yeah. And
It's typically not the start of a casual conversation.
no. But my wife knew and tried to encourage me to get help. But we'd only been married 6 or 8 months when I went through treatment the first time back in 2012.
Before we get there, do you mind? And again, ground rules. Share as much or as little as you're willing. Let's dig into that. What did that look like? Because I'm sure you didn't just go from having an RN license to that conversation with mom and dad of, hey, I just had to surrender it.
No, that was over a 2-year span. So I for lack of a better term, I got away with it for a long time. I used daily. It was just sign out meds as if I'd given them, and they went in my pocket and then in my mouth eventually. So.
Got you. Okay.
Yep. And then eventually, I was working in the home health setting and had a patient notice a bunch of pills missing out of a bottle and talked to my supervisor, and so I was called in, and they're such great people. In fact, my wife still works for that company, and they've looked past all of my stuff and don't judge her because of me. And in fact, they gave me a second chance, and I worked there again years later, and still struggled. But so they allowed me to surrender my own license instead of reporting me to the nursing board. And every state has a diversion program, so I was able to temporarily surrender my license, and if I went through a 5-year program with them, then I would get my license back and without any black marks on it or whatever you want to say. And so I went to treatment in Las Vegas. I went to detox and then did some day treatment and IOP and aftercare groups and nurse support group with other nurses for 5 years every week, and AA, and really found a touch of recovery, but I think my arrogance was still there. And
Can I pause you for 1 sec?
yeah,
First of all, thank you. Thank you for the vulnerability and thank you for sharing. I could tell that meant a lot to you, right? And I just wanted to say, you said, don't judge my wife for my mistakes. Anybody who's judging you for what you just shared is listening to the wrong podcast, right? Because these are stories of redemption, man.
yeah,
And I know that you know that. I just wanted to highlight that because some of this stuff's difficult to talk about, right? And like you said, it's not always our finest moments, but at the same time, that's not who you are anymore.
yeah. And they didn't judge me either. Like I said, they encouraged me to go get help, which I did. And then once I was licensed again, and years later, I worked in Vegas for a few years. But when I was able to work home health again, they no questions asked, come back and work for us again. And
That's phenomenal.
and they did. Yeah, they're awesome people.
So you said that you went to Vegas and you did a program in Vegas.
Yeah, just outpatient. So I live in Mesquite, so I'm driving down there every day for treatment. And then got my nursing license back about 6 months later with restrictions. And
Okay, so you didn't completely they gave you a path to be able to get it back.
Yeah, it's called temporarily surrendering your license, and then once you go through treatment and go through the initial requirements, then you're able to get a restricted license. So not having access to controlled substances, not being in a supervisor role, and a couple of things like that. And
yeah, basically guidelines to keep them safe and keep you safe.
Yeah,
I love that
for sure. But a lot of places don't like to hire contract nurses, and so it took me another about 9 months to find a job. But there was a hospital in Vegas that took a chance on me, and so I worked for them. But that was so I had been clean and sober about a year or so once I started working as a nurse again, and then somewhere in that year, I think I had the view that the drugs were just my problem, and now life's going good again, and no more meetings. I was going to the bare minimum requirements for the nursing board, just the nurses support group, and a couple AA meetings here and there.
Give me that will back.
Yeah, stopped working with a sponsor. And life was good. I mean, we were blessed with our second daughter a couple years later, but at some point, a few years down the road, it was.
To be fair, honestly, anybody's first time in a treatment or a recovery program, there's a learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember thinking the same thing. Like, I can totally relate to this, Keith, because I remember thinking like, oh yeah, if I just stop doing this, everything's going to be okay. And the reality is once you hit a certain point, right? The people that are listening to this podcast, people that have been guests on this podcast, hopefully understand what I'm saying. It's more than recreational, more than experimental. Once you cross a certain point, from that moment on, it has to be a lifestyle. It's not just a don't do a substance right? It's literally like there are things that you have to do daily, weekly, monthly, right? To keep yourself, I would say, out of the red zone.
Yeah.
But sounds like your first time around, you didn't fully understand that.
No, I was so naive to treatment. I remember sitting in my first AA meeting in Mesquite, Nevada, and just looking at the 12 steps banner on the wall and just like, yeah, okay, I understand that. I had no clue, but I was like, oh, that sounds pretty simple. And it is a simple program when you work it the right way. But
yeah, got you. Okay. So you were like, all right, I'm good. I'm cured.
Yeah, and so I stayed clean and sober for over 6 years. I was under the guidance of the nursing board and doing random UAs and things that whole time. And but it wasn't very long after I was out from free and clear from that I started having a couple beers on the weekend and like, oh, alcohol wasn't my problem, and it didn't become a daily problem until later on. But I started drinking again, and then it wasn't that many months after that. It was probably a year after I was free and clear with the nursing board again that I dipped my toe back in the opiate game, and I remember it was a Friday, and came across a couple of Percocet or something, and it's like, okay, I'll just do this for the weekend, and it wasn't very many weeks after that it was daily use again, and then fast forward to fall of 2020, my wife was like, we got to figure something out. So I went to detox here at Hope Rising in St. George and detox for a few days, and then didn't think I needed anything more than just a simple outpatient program, and lasted there for a couple of weeks, and then I was using again, and then went back to that same detox at the beginning of 21, detoxed again. That's when I went to outpatient with Ryan and them at Premier, but I wasn't even able to stay sober the whole time I was there. They were very patient with me. That following summer, I wrecked a truck and got a DUI, and it was finally at that point I got on Suboxone, so I got off the other opiates, and that finally got me off of the other pills, and
so you did a medication assisted treatment avenue, got you, which is very common these days.
Yeah. And for me, it was good. Like I work in treatment now, and we're not a medication-assisted treatment facility, but I believe there's a place for that. If someone can get off some of the other drugs and manage that, more power to them, even if it's for years, if that helps them lead a functional life, there's a place for that.
We're going to come right back to Keith's journey of recovery here after this short little mention from our sponsors, Diamond Detox. Appreciate you guys listening. We'll be right back after the short break.
You are listening to We Do Recover with Jared Miller and co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. We'll be right back after this short break with more of We Do Recover with Jared Miller. Brought to you by Diamond Detox, Rise Up Supplements, and the Hilton Garden Inn.
The team at Diamond Detox is compassionate, helpful, and trained to support every step of the healing journey. Your loved one's path to a healthier, happier life starts with a free and easy 20 to 30-minute assessment over the phone or a few questions submitted online on the Diamond Detox website. The team at Diamond Detox is compassionate, helpful, and
We welcome you back to We Do Recover with Jared Miller, co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. Brought to you by Diamond Detox, Rise Up Supplements, and the Hilton Garden Inn. And now with part 2 of our podcast, Jared Miller and Dr. Terry Sellers.
Hey, welcome back. Thank you for being back. Yes, Denovan.
I don't know. It did some of it, then it stopped.
It's all good.
And then it started, and then the whole thing's automated.
Yeah.
It's like trying to stop the space shuttle from launching. It just doesn't work. You just let it go. It's fine.
It's all good, buddy. All good. Episode 161, part 2, is brought to us by the Hilton Garden Inn. It is always sunny and bright at the Hilton Garden Inn in St. George, Utah. If you or a loved one has some plans, has a trip coming up, wants to get down here for some beautiful sun and some golf, first of all, please invite me and Keith. But
Absolutely.
Second of all, check out the Hilton Garden Inn in St. George, Utah. It's always sunny and bright at the Hilton Garden Inn. They have amazing amenities. Check them out on Google. We appreciate them sponsoring this podcast. So before we went to the break, you were sharing that you kind of got into some active addiction, had a period of 6 years, which is actually pretty impressive, right? So yeah, that 6 years isn't nothing.
Yeah.
And then you kind of struggled and went to Premier, and they were patient with you, but you know, kind of couldn't quite get it all to line up and click. Went to some detoxes back and forth. I'll pass it back off to you.
Yeah. So beginning of 2021, my dad passed away, and he had managed a landfill for a long time, and he was a contractor and numerous things up in central Utah. And so they were still under contract to run that for a couple more years after he passed away, and my mom was kind of struggling to do that. And late in 2021, I was on Suboxone and doing okay there, but I convinced myself at the time that I was burnt out on nursing and wanted to go help my mom with that. So I started, the beginning of 2022, I started commuting every week. I would go up and stay with her and help manage that landfill. And it wasn't very many months into that. I think some of it was just feeling kind of hopeless because my wife would be home holding down the fort, and if something came up with the kids, I'm 300 miles away, and,
Right.
and that was no excuse to start drinking. I'm not implying that at all. She would not want to hear that either. But at some point there, I started drinking, and not very long. It doesn't take me long to get to be a daily user, and so then I became a daily drinker. And I was on the shot form of Suboxone, so I got that in my system, and I'm drinking every day, and I did that for a solid year until the summer of 2023. I had a drunken altercation with my mom and her boyfriend at the time, and spent a night in jail. And that was the last drink or drug I've had since then. The next day, my wife came up, or she came and got my daughter, because my daughter witnessed the horrible situation, and my mom and my sister came and picked me up from jail the next morning, and then I headed home, and my wife basically said, "You're going to treatment, or at minimum, I'm gone, and probably the kids." And
I there's a little nugget in there that I just kind of want to point out, though, like the fact that you started drinking every day because you were like no longer with your wife, and you said she wouldn't want to hear that, right? But at the same time, there is a message in there of accountability, right? Because when obviously she's not okay with you drinking every day, right? And so here you are kind of on your own. Part of your support system is no longer there. That accountability is kind of no longer there, right? When left to our own devices,
Yeah.
we don't always make the best decisions.
I mean, I was literally a 39-year-old man drinking in my mother's basement every night. Not a proud moment. And hiding it. I mean, my mom is a saint. She's a typical, just good LDS Utah Mormon. And so obviously she wouldn't agree if she would have known that. And she caught on at one point. I remember her asking me, like, hey, you're not drinking at the landfill, are you? I'm like, no. And I wasn't. I would always just drink on my way home in the evening, but I would drink to get drunk every night.
For the listener, though, I think that that's important, is just pointing out just how important support systems are. Accountability partners, support systems, basically people that are going to kind of hold you to the deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your wife says,
yeah,
get it together. You're
so
going
I'm
to
like,
treatment.
okay, I'll do some outpatient treatment. She's like, no, you are going to residential. And thankfully, I have an aunt that's in recovery, and she had went to the women's program of Renaissance Ranch, where I was able to go, and she coordinated with my wife and the executive director up in the Bluffdale location, and 2 days later, or 3 days after I went to jail, so 2 days after coming home, I was on my way to Bluffdale to check into Renaissance Ranch, and that was the beginning of finally being in true recovery.
Got you. Which is pretty sweet. What like, talk to me about, what did you think a residential was going to be like, and what was it like when you checked into the ranch? Because I think a lot of people out there have this fear of, like, oh, it's going to be like a lockdown facility, or it's going to be ran like Fort Knox, or there's just a lot of myth and a lot of, and then you get, the people, Hollywood that make movies of stuff. And so, like, what was your perception of what it was going to be like versus the reality?
I didn't really know what I was getting into. I remember pulling into the parking lot and just sitting there with my wife for a minute before we went in, and I think the guys must have just got out of group, because here comes a couple of guys that are, tattooed head to toe, and I'm like, whoa, I'm not sure what I'm getting into here. But I've always been taught to, if I'm doing, like, even going back to being a missionary, like, if you're going to do something, like, try and give it your all. And so once I got there, it was like, we made some financial sacrifices. My wife's home holding down the fort with the kids. Like, I'm going to be willing to do what they asked me to do here, and, like, give it my best. And I was probably there maybe 7 or 10 days when I kind of had my first real, like, I was kind of complying my way into acceptance, and then finally found some true acceptance. Like, yeah, I need to be here, and willing and able to do everything they asked me, and I tried to do that. And
what was that shift about? Was there a particular group? Was a particular thing?
There was 2 times. I remember the first Sunday, we went to an addiction fireside at an LDS church up there somewhere, and it was when we were singing the song "I Am a Child of God," and I felt that for the first time in a long time. The last few years of my active addiction, I would say I became borderline agnostic. I mean, I was raised in a religious home and always had that connection with God. And at some point through that darkness, I borderline convincing myself that there's nothing out there. And so I was in a very dark spiritual place at that time. But I had felt something, and I'm like, oh, wow, I know what that is. I remember what that is.
Nice.
And then the second experience was when I was presenting my step 1, like, autobiography to the group, and had a counselor really kind of questioning me, and he was asking me how I felt about a certain thing, and I was trying to think my way into what I was feeling, like think about how to give him the right answer, and he called me out on it. He's like, no, stop thinking, tell me what you're feeling. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm feeling. I had no idea what I was feeling.
Yeah.
And so that was pivotal, and I just gained so much respect for the counselors I had, the staff there, and Renaissance Ranch has a really strong alumni program. So every Wednesday night they have alumni. They run it like an AA meeting, but all the residential guys and all the outpatient guys, and then any alumni come, and then you can zoom into it. And there's a room of 60 to 70 guys every Wednesday night, and some really strong alumni. And looked up to some of those guys. The guy I did my step 5 with, Damien, who now is a colleague. He's one of the finance guys up for the corporation, and so it's just so crazy to a couple of years later now be interacting with these people on a professional level when I was just a client a couple of years ago with them. So
That's also what makes it super cool.
yeah,
Because now you're that alumni, right?
yeah,
Like, yeah, that's synergistic. You know what I mean? People coming in, people helping people. Love it. Okay, so residential. Was
Yeah.
that back in like what year was this?
This was 2023.
Oh, okay.
So this was
I was
just the
going to say,
summer.
residentials used to be like a 90-day program, but this is more recently.
Yeah, so it was a 60-day program. So I completed that, and then I came home. I didn't go to sober living or anything. I came home,
Home to Mesquite.
but I was still, for the rest of that year, I was still commuting up to Fairview to help with the landfill till the end of that contract. And so I was still up there during the week. So I was close enough. I was able to go up to alumni every week, which was big for me. But the rest of my outpatient was just on Zoom because it was just not feasible to drive that far, 4 nights a week.
But also, like, that's good that it worked. Because there is a
absolutely.
lot of virtual, there's a lot of programs that, they'll do the residential detox or get you from jail, whatever it is. You got to get physically stabilized first. And then you do residential, which is continued physical and emotional stabilization. And then they do PHP. But then the IOP, if home is in Mesquite and you can't make it to an in-person, there's a lot of agencies out there that will do a virtual IOP option. So it's cool that it was successful for you.
Yeah, for me, it really was. And there was only usually 3 or 4 of us that did the Zoom. There was a guy that lived back east, and my recovery coach, Steve, who ran the Zoom, he lives in California, and he was a huge part of my outpatient program. And I call him a close friend now. He's way more than just a recovery coach to me. But that smaller group for me was good because we got super vulnerable, and I we would do these long check-ins, and that was very therapeutic for me in the outpatient setting for sure.
Nice. So it was almost even more beneficial because instead of getting lost in a crowd amongst 12 to 16 people, 15, whatever the cutoff is for the agency, there was 4 of you. See, I thought that they like zoomed you into the meeting with the people in person.
One night a week we would Zoom into the main IOP,
Got it.
and then the one night we would Zoom into the alumni meeting. But then Mondays and Thursdays would be just us, the Zoom guys.
Got you.
And
Yeah.
I thought it was set up pretty well. And in fact, Steve, my recovery coach, he was actually pivotal in me going back into nursing. I had come to the conclusion that I'm just not going to be a nurse anymore. I can't stay sober in that setting. I don't really have a desire to do traditional nursing anymore. And at one point, I was probably a couple months from graduation, and every time I've got sober or tried to, I've always thought like I want to work in the treatment world. Like I think this is where I belong. And a couple months after getting sober this last time, I was telling my wife that, and she's like, okay, well, you've been saying this every time, so figure it out and do it if you want. Like, let's see how you can do this. And a couple months after that, I was talking to Steve one night in a check-in, and his wife's a nurse, and he's like, why don't you see if you could do something with nursing in this world? And
There's a
I'm
lot
just
of
like,
need out there.
Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've got the education. I don't need to just put it by the wayside. I can at least use my knowledge. And so I, around that same time, he put me in contact with Tyson Dixon, the owner of the ranch. And he's acted like there would be an opportunity here in the St. George area to eventually use some nursing skills. And so I started the process and got licensed with the state of Utah. And because of my history, I'm on a 3-year probation with them, but that's fine. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, I do reports to the nursing board every now quarter, but was monthly. And, I do random drug tests. Did one today. No big deal. And, and for guys like me, they're just trying to keep the public safe, and I'm more than willing. So I'm super glad that I pursued that path again. And so initially here in the St. George location, it was just an outpatient, and so they started me as a recovery coach not very long after I graduated the outpatient program, and in the last year we've been in the process of opening a residential location here, and we just opened that recently, and that's where I'm at.
Yeah, Curtis came on. It was like the week that you guys were opening it, and it sounds like you guys have got it kind of up and rocking and rolling, got some clients in there going well. Yeah. Important thing though to that is like, you know, you didn't just jump back into that nursing role. You started off as a recovery coach, and I believe now, so you're working at Renaissance down here in Southern Utah, and you're a house manager.
Yeah,
right.
The director of operations. Yeah,
but you still have the ability, if the need comes, to be able to step into that medical position.
Yeah, in fact,
and who better than the house manager to have some medical skills, right? Because stuff pops off all the time.
For sure. And our medical director, Tyler, who I think I'm going to have you get on here soon, but he's up north, so he's all virtual. So every week I'm in with the clients when he meets with them virtually. So I'm sitting there getting orders from him, and I'm the medical resource for the outpatient setting, and we've developed a very good working relationship, a good trusting relationship, and so I'm just kind of his eyes and ears on site and able to use that. And then the operations side, I finally feel like this is where I'm supposed to be in my career. Like this is finally, 42 years old, and finally found where I'm supposed to work, but I'm super grateful to be here. So.
Isn't that such a cool thing though, when you can look back kind of reflectively and go, all of that led to this. And so even when we go through, all of that, we'll call it, right? The trials, the tribulations, the times that are a little rough or frustrating or whatever it is, it's just kind of cool, like how our higher power can work in our life like that.
Yeah.
You look back and go, man, I had to go through that to get to there, to get to there, to get to here. Yeah. It's just a crazy thing, man.
Yeah, I remember probably around the same time I was contemplating maybe being a nurse again or working as a nurse again. And my sponsor at the time, I was kind of in my own way still battling with the higher power concept, trying to define it, and was kind of just frustrated one day talking to him. And I'm like, man, I'm 40 years old and feel like I'm starting over again. And he's an older guy. He got sober when he was in his 60s, and he looked at me, he goes, how old are you? And I said, I'm 40. He's like, Keith, you got a whole life ahead of you. And that was just a simple little comment, but that I just needed to hear that day, and we all do. We have a whole life ahead of us. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that's humbling now with the clientele that we work with, a lot of them have bottoms that are way different than mine, and it's super humbling because ultimately, because I did finally go to treatment and get this deal, as they say, my wife has been so super patient and loving and stayed by my side. I haven't lost what a lot of people do. It's so humbling to see guys come in with literally a couple of outfits, and that's what they own. Yeah.
No driver's license.
No
social.
No.
Yeah, and that's a whole different. The cool thing about that though is, what's that saying? The darker the bottom, the brighter the top, or whatever. I don't even know, right? Yeah. I'm not going to get philosophical here with you, but you get the idea of the saying, right? Is like those stories are pretty cool stories. Not to make this about me, but to that point, my rock bottom was that. I mean, it was homeless. It was on the run from the law. It was, it was pretty gritty.
Yeah.
And today, sometimes I pull into, my house after getting off work in a job that I love, being around good dudes like you, right? Like-minded individuals. And I think to myself, like, this is insane, man. Right?
Yeah.
So some of those are the best comeback stories from people like that.
Yeah. And in fact, my boss, who you know very well, we were on the same cart this morning golfing, and
a guy by the name of Chad Brandon.
Chad Brandon. I'm in my position solely at work because of the vision that he had for me, and I love that man and super grateful for him as well. But I can't remember how he worded it, but he said, like, so is this where you want, or like, is this the life of your dreams or something like that? And I'm like, yeah, I'm on my way to that finally, and finally trying to be the man of honor that my family deserves. So.
That's amazing. I hope that they hear this and they're proud of you, man. I feel like that's all I've known is this Keith, right? But this Keith is a really good dude.
Yeah, I'm not always the best person in the home. I still struggle to be mentally present with my wife and kids, and I can get so wrapped up in work. And even when I come home, it's hard to shut that mind down. And I never knew. I think I'm just finally realizing when people say like, "Oh, I'm always in my own head." I'd be like, yeah, I don't really struggle with that type of anxiety, but I absolutely do. Like I have to do things on a daily basis to shut my mind down and be present with anybody besides myself.
Back to that meditation, right?
Yep.
Sometimes you gotta take a step out of that and just see that wheel spinning. Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, it just sounds to me like you're a human.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, my own therapist had to kind of put me in check yesterday about some old behaviors kind of creeping back in, and he's like, "Come on, dummy, you know where this leads. Like just like not taking a break at work and getting so wrapped up in I got to do this to make sure the guys in the house have their needs met, and Chad's kind of put me in check today and this week about that too, and I sometimes need to find that balance that I don't always have in my own life.
Yeah. Well, and I think it naturally for some of us just using work as a coping skill or it can even become an addiction itself, right? Mm-hmm. It's a thing that you gotta be aware of.
Well, you'll get guys in early recovery that think if I just get a job, then I'm fine, and it usually doesn't pan out well for them, and that's their sole focus is as long as I'm working, I'm good. Well, I've been that guy.
Right, and I've seen it, and I actually because for a minute it's really good for them because they get purpose, they have a reason, but that can't be it because eventually that newness is going to wear off. It's just going to become life. One of the conversations clinically that I would have all the time in group therapy is, in IOP they're doing the deal, they're going to work, they're coming in for night IOP, right? Mm-hmm. And like oftentimes I hear, man, life's just lame, life sucks, blah blah blah, and I'm like, what if this is just life? Like, what if this is just the new normal?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what your idea of it's supposed to be, but this might just be reality. Yeah. And so if you can't find some acceptance in that, then you're going to be miserable. And misery is a choice.
Yeah, but that mundane life to me is pretty damn cool at this point. Like, I look forward to doing yard work on Saturdays and just hanging out at home, and golfing on Friday mornings is a staple of my recovery.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so funny you say that because, in my previous role working in this industry as a clinical director, running a team and just being a, problem solver and stuff like that, there were times where I honestly, if I'm being honest, I would start to kind of feel burned out, and the phone rings and you kind of get the anxiety like, oh, what's wrong now? Right. Yeah. And then to be totally frank, on Curtis's episode, I shared that I was let go. And there for a while, it was like, you don't really appreciate having a job, having a consistent income, the people that you work with. One of the hardest things has just been missing the people that I work with, that camaraderie, that connection, that, going in and sharing how your weekend was, or making plans to go on a brunch date with, a buddy at work and their significant other. Like, you don't miss that stuff until it's not there anymore. And then you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes you appreciate it a whole lot more.
For sure.
So, and at the same time, we can't make work our program of recovery.
No, I made that mistake. So I've been working in treatment for about a year next month. And when I was in between the landfill and then starting with the ranch, I was home for a couple of months, kind of stay-at-home dad stuff. And so I was going to meetings every single morning. I was doing that, working with a sponsor. And then once I started working, that tapered off. And about my year mark, so last July, I was feeling kind of just spiritually off again, and it's like, okay, I need to change something up. And around that time is when Chad invited me to go golfing the first time, and that made a big difference because I wasn't doing anything like that in my personal life. I committed to start being physically healthier, eating a little bit better, and then at that time I had remembered way back from Ryan Park, and I'd done some breathing and stuff on and off over the years, but I'm like, I'm gonna make breath work and meditation a staple, and since then it's pretty much every morning I'll get up and go out on my back porch and do some Wim Hof breathing and some meditation and just kind of get centered for the day, pray, and then I'm off to the races for the day, and that's a huge part of my life now. You still work with a recovery coach or a sponsor, attend AA, any fellowship? Like if I were to ask you, Keith, what does your program of recovery look like today? I love the routine because that's a big one for me too. What else does that look like in your maintenance phase? So that's one of the things that tapered off too when I started working in treatment. It's like, oh, I'm around this all day. I'm doing okay. and stopped checking in with my old sponsor. And it was a few months where I wasn't going to a lot of meetings myself. I always zoom into the Bluffdale alumni. That I just love that meeting. So that's been a weekly thing. But just recently, again, I got a sponsor. We golf with him every Friday. You know him very well, and started going to some in-person meetings just very recently, and starting to dig into that again because I know the value. There's still a lot of work on myself that needs to happen, and I need to do it through that. I've been talking to my therapist about it, and he's encouraged it as well, and so that's where I'm kind of getting back on track in a lot of ways, I think.
I love that, man. I've seen that fatal flaw a lot of times as people that work in treatment think, oh, okay, this can be my program, and it's not. You're there to help other people develop their program. Yeah. So I appreciate you being willing to kind of talk about what your program looks like. And it's very easy to, right? I was having a conversation with a buddy the other day, and I was like, yeah, I hit my maintenance meetings. And he's like, what does that mean? And I'm like, what? Like, I have my meetings that I routinely attend, but if I'm feeling a little, just not right or off, or then I'll have some maintenance meetings where I'll implement some more meetings. And he kind of laughed, and he said, Jared, that's just, that whole perspective is all wrong, because you've gotten to the point you're at now. Your job now is to give back, right? And as soon as you think, oh, I've got it figured out, I only have to do one meeting a week, or I only have to do this, that's already taking your will back, right? Like, you're already making it just about you instead of contributing to a community of people that have given you something. Yeah. And when he told me that, dude, first of all, I felt this big, but it was eye-opening.
Yeah. I need to give back outside of work. Somebody said once, like, service is not if you work in the field. Like, service is what you do otherwise.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Keith. It's been a pleasure having you on here. Appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Appreciate you having me.
Thank you for joining us today on We Do Recover with Jared Miller.
Help us spread our message of hope. Like, comment, and share.
If you have any topics or ideas for future shows, please share that on our Facebook page.
That Facebook page is We Do Recover with Jared Miller. If you or a loved one needs help, please reach out to us. Again, thank you for listening.
Brought to you by Diamond Detox, Rise Up Supplements, and the Hilton Garden Inn. This has been a production from a podcast studio.